Hello, this is Scottish Independence Podcast episode number 131. This time, before we get into the interview, I'd just like to go back in time a little bit and ask the listeners if you remember some of those times when I had an English person on the show and I felt the need to begin the conversation in this way. Let's have a listen, see if you remember it. Do you remember that? No, of course you don't remember that, because it never happened and it never would happen. However, I think you'd probably like to hear this clip from the BBC Great Lives programme, which recently featured Alex Salmond, and this was part of the actual introduction to the show. Have a listen.
He's also now a broadcaster on LBC, where he bills himself as honest and straight-talking. As the BBC's late Robert Robinson used to say, we'll be the judge of that. I've got to say, as an Englishman, it was such a pleasant surprise for me that you didn't choose some semi-mythical, romantic, tartan-draped guts and glory figure, but a real ambiguous, damaged Scot with a difficult legacy.
Yes, that was your great British national broadcaster there. Anyway, on to today's guest. For this episode, I spoke with Sharon Dolan-Powers, who you will probably know under another name. I don't want to put too many spoilers before the interview, so it's probably best just to go to it. But before we start the show, I'll just say it's always interesting when we get the perspective of someone who came to Scotland but wasn't from here and then got involved in Scottish politics on the yes side. Also, as the interview progresses, it will become clearer just why I stuck in that bit with the introduction from the BBC programme. So here's the conversation, and I hope you enjoy. Hi Sharon, how's it going?
It's great. We're having a very sunny day here in the Isle of Seal.
The Isle of what, sorry?
Seal.
This is the first thing I wanted to get onto, because people will have already understood from the accent that you're not someone who grew up in Scotland, shall we say. You came over from, well, why don't you tell the listeners, where did you come over from and why?
Oh dear, that's a long story. I'll try and make it brief. My husband and I came to Scotland in 2005 with my son, who has quite severe autism. And we initially settled in just outside of Dumfries because there was quite a good specialist school there. And the reason we came actually might have a lot to do with George Bush's second term being elected as president. We'll leave it at that.
Well, no, that just makes me think with Trump. So you're not going back for a Trump presidency?
Oh, God, no. No.
So when you got here, what were you doing here?
When I first arrived, my husband had a job in Carlisle as head of an educational unit at a high school there. And myself, I was working at the time in America before we came as a freelance, what they call a text interpreter, basically sort of captioning and live things like university lectures for people that were deaf and hearing impaired. And so it was a skill I could pick up and bring here quite easily. So I started getting work right away.
As time moved on, you've become more famous under another name than your own, shall we say. A lot of people listening now will know you under your Twitter name. So what's that all about?
Yes. Well, my Twitter name is the patron saint of cats, and that is very strange. I started on Twitter and I probably watched it for almost 2 years, I would say, just not quite understanding how it worked. But around the same time, the independence referendum and the whole, first Indy ref thing was starting to happen, and I wanted to get more sort of engaged with people. And I had to figure out a way to get in there, and I didn't want to use my own name because it's quite boring. And so I thought, well, cats have always sort of sought me out, and I quite like them as well. So I knew a bit about St. Gertrude, who is the patron saint of cats, and I thought, well, that might be a kind of a fun persona to adopt. And, the internet's all about cats anyway.
Yeah, I wanted to quote that guy to you. It was what's his name? Tim Berners-Lee. And he's as famous as the guy who kind of started up the internet or invented the idea. And they asked him, how did you feel your invention would be? How did you feel it would go? And he said, I thought there would be less cats.
Never.
Anyway, so like just to take a step back there. So when you were in America, because we're going to go on to the Scottish independence part in a moment, but when you were in America, were you already a political person? Were you involved with it, or was it only coming to Scotland that started to get you interested in that sort of stuff?
I've always been very interested, obviously. I got more involved in that particular political campaign because, we'd already seen the damage Bush had done the first term, and so I became more determined. So we volunteered, my husband and I, for doing phone banks and stuff to try and, generate more votes for the Democratic challenger at the time. That sort of spurred me on, and when we moved here, I was more interested in settling and getting my son, in a comfortable place and getting acclimated. So I really wasn't all that fussed with it, frankly, until 2007, I guess it was, when the SNP government or minority government happened. And suddenly things started looking quite interesting because I hadn't paid attention to politics before that. And then I went, who are these guys? I like a lot of what they're saying.
Just to come back to that second, you said there it took you a little while to get acclimatized. What was that? I mean, I always find these kind of questions interesting. Coming to Scotland as someone not from here, and also your husband's not from here, how did you find it at first? Were people, welcoming? Where were you living? Was it a rough time, or did people help?
Oh no, it wasn't rough at all. It was it was interesting for me because part of my work was taking me all over the UK. It wasn't just here. I was doing big conferences in England and Northern Ireland and Wales. So I was having to tune up my ear to all kinds of accents, not just Scottish ones. But I do have to say that some of my first Scottish encounters, even as far south as Dumfries, I was absolutely dumbfounded. I couldn't understand what some of the locals were saying, and it was my bad. That was, not me not understanding. But I did get caught like a deer in the headlights a couple times.
Where did you move to first when you came?
We first moved to a rural location just outside of Dumfries.
And now you're out on an island.
Now I'm on the island of Seal, which actually has a bridge, if you know anything about it, which is quite good to be on an island that has a bridge. So it makes getting shipments easier, for one thing. But yes, our mortgage company, let's just say, sort of forced us to sell the house earlier in the year, which we were a bit devastated by. But we figured if we had to move, especially at our ages, then we needed to move somewhere that we really, really liked. And we really liked the Highlands. And my husband had come up to Oban for a job interview, and we just decided to do a little driving around to see what the area was like. And we drove over the bridge to Seal on a beautiful sunny winter day, and we looked at each other and went, oh my God, this is it.
It is sort of spectacular up there.
Oh my gosh, it is.
Like, and then people say it's grey. Well, it's not. You open the window every day, or you look out the window every day, and the light's different every single time. That's the amazing stuff up there.
Yeah, the way the weather changes so fast,
Uh,
so always something different happening.
well, that's the old expression, isn't it? If you don't like
Yeah,
the weather in Scotland, wait 10 minutes.
yep, exactly.
All right. But then, so you said you started to take an interest in, the SNP politics and the independence movement. That started with one election, you said, but how did it progress from there? How did you start to get involved?
Well, I'll tell you what got my attention was I remember in the media hearing in the run up to that there was absolutely no way that you could drop the bridge toll charges. Um, and I thought, okay, and they made such a big deal out of it. And then the minority government came in, and the first thing they did was they scrapped the bridge toll charges. And I thought, wow,
Hmm.
these guys are not only, saying things I like, they're doing things.
And so did you decide to join a local group or did you just read up on it more? Where did it go from there?
My husband and I, he was formerly Labor, and in fact was a Labor candidate in Cornwall years ago. So he was watching the ultimate deterioration of the Labor Party as he knew it, and he also was very impressed by what was happening with the SNP. So we just decided to join the local branch and started getting involved.
And then when the independence referendum came up, you were involved in the badge company.
Oh, the badge company actually happened after
Oh,
if you can believe it. It's only been a year since we've been in business.
so what is the Bonnie Badge Company for people who've not heard about it?
The Bonnie Badge Company is a business that I started from, a spare room in our house in Dumfries. And I was at the time working with the local CND group that we had helped to revive. And they had an event in a park down in Dumfries. So we borrowed a badge maker from a friend, and I started making some designs for that group to sell at their stall. And my designs just seemed to be very popular. And I thought, well, in what I'd been watching happen over the time since the independence referendum, there was still a huge appetite out there for people to express themselves in terms of being pro-independence. And I didn't see anybody that was meeting that need. So I decided to start designing badges for that purpose. And, it took a bit of time to get underway and figure out how I was going to reach out to people and establish like an online shopping type system. So that's been through some, twists and turns, but I'm pretty happy where we're at now.
Are you getting quite a lot of orders?
It's interesting how it ebbs and flows. I do get a lot of orders. I get a lot of orders that are not from the online shop at all. I get, organizations and yes groups and, women's groups. All kinds of people are ordering bands, things that are off and outside of my online presence.
So when it came to the independence referendum, you'd already joined the SNP, but you mentioned that was because of, bridges and bridge tolls and other, you liked the ideas and the policies, but what was it that convinced you about Scottish independence? Because there are people who, there's people who vote Labour but want independence.
Sure.
There are people who vote SNP but are not necessarily sure about independence. What was it that convinced you? Why was it that you specifically decided to support independence?
This is going to, I'm going to really boil it down to one fine point, and that's kind of what I saw in people around me, which was a Scottish cringe, basically. Because coming in and looking in from outside, I kept thinking, what a fantastic country this is, what a fantastic people these are, and why on earth wouldn't they want to be independent? I couldn't understand it, couldn't get my head around it at all.
No, there's plenty of us that can't get our head around it as well, but
Well, yes.
But there's an interesting point though, coming in as an outsider and seeing this Scottish cringe, because there certainly isn't an American cringe, Americans are not.
Not that I've encountered.
No, Americans are usually quite confident in their own culture, as are the vast majority of other countries. It seems to be something quite unique to Scotland. This and how did that make you feel when you were seeing it?
Well, like I said, I just a bit dumbfounded actually. I mean, of course, there were people around me, Scottish people, that weren't that way, but it was made me quite sad, to see how indoctrinated I suppose people had been, and I couldn't, again, this is going to sound harsh, but I kept sort of hearkening back to things like the U.S. South, where people were kept ignorant and were, not given opportunities and became dependent on the state. And, basically a lot of them just sort of slipped into this mode of whatever, we don't really get engaged with politics.
So do you think that's what it was? An indoctrination about, Scotland is too wee, too poor, too stupid. Do you think it's been so much indoctrination over the years that's created
Well,
this idea?
I think it has to be. I mean, from my standpoint, certainly it looks like that, again, from the outside, because you've got an education system that didn't teach, children what their actual history was, for one thing, that focused on another country's history over their own, that their language had been sidelined considerably, both Gaelic and Scots, So I just think that there's a cultural thing that got quashed, that the media was very, very, instrumental in doing that, but so was the education system for a long time.
So there's a good comparison. The Scotsman or Fox News, who is more mad?
Oh, God. I think that'd be a close draw, actually.
In very, very different ways, but yeah, there's equal insanity in a certain ways. But
Yeah.
okay, and there's also